Hello, everyone. We're just going to give folks one more minute to join, and then we will get started. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar about federal earmarks. And we are going to remove any of the AI note takers. So apologies if that is one of your note takers. But this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website as well as the slides. So you'll be able to, come back if you missed something. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So hello again. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation about federal earmark funding and how your organization, your school, state or local government can take advantage of this funding to support your work in preventing and ending youth homelessness. So please go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat. We like to know who's here with us today. Name, pronouns, org, where you are, how your day is going so far. My emoji is that guy whose head is blowing off. Yeah, that's me today. And please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box throughout the presentation. We'll try and keep an eye on the chat as well, but just since we have a number of folks, it's a little easier for us to see them in the Q&A box, and we'll try and answer throughout, but we also have time at the end today for more discussion. As I mentioned, the slides and the recording will be available after today on our website. And then we do have a survey that we would ask you to just take a quick minute to complete so that we can improve for next time. And if you have any additional questions afterwards, there's a space in there to put those as well. So if you're not familiar with the National Network for Youth, we work with youth who have lived experience of homelessness, as well as youth service providers from across the country on federal policy and community-based solutions to prevent and end homelessness and human trafficking among youth and young adults and young parent families. So please visit our website to learn more about our work. And I would also encourage you to sign up for our newsletters if you want to stay appraised of what's happening in the youth homelessness space. We are also a membership organization, so we would love to invite you to become an organizational or an individual member with the National Network for Youth. We have some, perks for our members, including special member newsletters, members-only sessions, peer-to-peer support, some free consulting hours, and more. So to learn more about membership, just go to our website membership page that's linked here. All right. So I'm so grateful to be joined today by two leaders in the youth homelessness space. We have Josh Selo, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Bill Wilson Center in California, and then Josh Louwerse, who is the Director of Ledge Affairs and Youth Systems Improvement at Covenant House, Alaska. And you're going to have a chance to hear from both of them today about their Earmarks project and the process that they went through to be successful in obtaining that earmark. But we'll start out with big intro overview of earmarks. What are earmarks? How do you apply? What makes a strong application? All of that kind of information. And then I'll turn it over to Josh and Josh to talk about their experience. And then finally, we'll have some time for questions and discussion at the end. So let's get into it, starting with what are earmarks? Simply put, they are one-time federal funding opportunities for eligible entities, which includes nonprofits, schools, local governments, tribal governments, higher education institutions, etc. So they are a one-time sum of money meant to kind of expand or bolster, kickstart your ongoing work or even new work to prevent and end youth homelessness in our case. They're not like federal grants, like say the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act grant, where you're kind of getting money every year for 3 to 5 years, and then you can reapply each time for the grant. And they're not like McKinney-Vento funding, for example, where your school gets like an allocation each year. Earmarks are, again, a one-time funding award to really kind of bolster or start a program. Now, earmarks happen through the annual appropriations process. So this is the process every year by which Congress funds the federal government. They set aside a very, very small amount of our overall national budget to award earmarks, or I should say most years they do this. There have been some years in the past where they decide that they're not going to award earmark funding, or they might have more restrictive guidelines on who can apply. But as far as we know, so far earmarks will be awarded in this upcoming appropriation cycle, which is fiscal year 2027. So that's where the money comes from, is that kind of little set aside in our national budget. And you actually apply for an earmark through your federal member of Congress. And this could be your House representative or your senator. Sometimes they even work jointly to award earmarks. But you should be in close conversation with at least one of your lawmakers' offices before you submit your application and kind of throughout the process. And then finally, earmarks is just the general term that can refer to both the House and the Senate processes. But in the House, earmarks are called community project funding. And in the Senate, they're called Congressionally Directed Spending. So just be on the lookout for those terms as well. But earmarks is just sort of the colloquial term to refer to both. All right. So here's an overview of the process. So first, as I mentioned, you really want to be in close conversation with the lawmaker you're going to apply through. If you have been to our advocacy webinars before, we talk all the time about how important it is to have relationships with your lawmakers and staff. And the earmarks process is just another reason why that's so important. So if you've never spoken with your lawmaker or their staff before, that's okay. But I would reach out to them as soon as possible to introduce yourself, introduce your program, what kind of project you're thinking about applying for, all of that, because they're more likely to accept requests from programs they know, people they know, and projects they really understand the importance of. And if you do need contact information for your lawmaker's staff, you can go ahead and email me. We have access to a staff database and can share those contacts with you. Of course, you're going to submit your application. These applications are posted on your lawmaker's websites. So if you're applying through the House, just search your lawmaker's name plus fiscal year 2027 CPF application. Senate, your senator's name plus FY27 CDS application, or even earmarks application. Some lawmakers already have the applications on their website, so definitely be sure to check soon. Most applications are due in April, but lawmakers can set their own deadlines earlier than that if they want to. I've seen some say, already in mid-March. Some said that's their tentative deadline, but just really, really check. The Appropriations Committee has not released the detailed guidance for fiscal year 2027 earmarks yet. So if you don't see your lawmaker's application up, that's probably why. But you should still reach out directly to staff, whether the application is there or not, reach out to express your interest in applying. Okay, so you've submitted your application on the lawmaker's website. Say that they've accepted your request. Now your request actually has to go through the whole annual appropriations process and be approved by the appropriations committees and the rest of Congress. So it's not just up to your individual lawmaker. There are many other rounds of approval that your request needs to go through as part of that appropriations process. And then finally, say your request was fully approved, it's made it through the appropriations process, then you'll go on to work with the appropriate federal agency that is actually the one who's going to pay you. You'll sign the contract with, so that, appropriations money goes through the federal agency, and then they'll work with you to get your earmark payment. And that exact process kind of varies depending on what project you got funded. And you'll hear about that in a moment and from our speakers as well. So that's the process overview, really high level. Reach out to your lawmaker staff, submit your application on their website, wait for your application to be approved through the appropriations process, and then finally, you work with the federal agency on the contract, implementation, and payment. So here's an estimated timeline for that process. Expect the entire process from application to payout to take at least a year. Sometimes it is longer. So really right now, as I already said, you should be emailing your lawmaker staff, express your interest in applying. What kind of project are you thinking about? Ask them what is the process? When's the deadline? And we've had congressional staffers tell us, really be persistent and consistent with your communications, because they get so much outreach every day that you really want, your communications to catch their eye. Also, starting now and then throughout March, you want to, of course, work on your application. We'll talk about tips for strong application, and be sure that you really know exactly what information your lawmaker wants to see. And another tip to consider is to invite your lawmakers and their staff to visit your program or for an in-person meeting so that you can really work on building that strong relationship and help them understand why the work you do is so important. We do have our in-district advocacy tool linked here, and that goes into great detail about how to schedule an in-district meeting, in-person meeting, and a site visit with your lawmakers and their staff. Now, as I mentioned, most applications are due in April. Some lawmakers might have earlier deadlines, so just be sure to check. Again, I've already seen some folks have posted their earmarks applications already. And then your lawmaker should let you know if you've been selected after that, because then the appropriations process is going to kick off pretty soon. And then if you're selected by your lawmaker, you'll just wait out the annual appropriations process. This process is supposed to be done by September 30th of each year. This almost never happens. Usually it takes closer to December for them to finish appropriations. It's been taking them longer and longer for the past few years. As many of you probably know, they just finished the appropriations cycle, I think last week. So much later than September, which is why I say, the whole process takes about a year, but it can take longer. And all throughout this process, throughout the year, whether or not really you're actively applying for an earmark, really prioritize building those relationships with your lawmakers and their staff. You just never know what other opportunities could arise from that close relationship. In fact, we had a provider speak at our last webinar who they were actually invited by their lawmaker to apply for the earmark. They didn't solicit, they didn't reach out first. Their lawmaker knew them and they invited them to apply. So having those relationships are really important. Okay, so we talked about the process, estimated timeline, and now we'll touch on an important detail here that should really be your guide as you're thinking about potential projects. So as I mentioned, earmarks are that little set aside in the overall national budget, and then they go through the federal agencies. So federal agencies that participate in earmarks have their own earmark accounts. And when you apply, you'll need to indicate what account your project fits under. There are many different accounts, but I've just listed the ones that will probably be most relevant to you all who are working in the youth homelessness space. But again, talking about accounts is a great question for your lawmakers staff as well. But the first one I have here is under the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This is the Economic Development Initiative, or EDI. You'll often hear it called HUD EDI. This is one of the more popular accounts because it's one of the few accounts that are available for construction projects. So building new facilities, rehabilitating facilities, even acquisition of property. And because of that, requests under this account are typically higher. They're usually between $1.5 to $4 million. Under the Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Children and Families, two primary accounts: child abuse prevention and social services research and demonstration. So under child abuse prevention, this is programming to improve the prevention, assessment, identification, and treatment of child abuse. It's not the most popular account for nonprofits, but it is possible. And then under SSRD, Social Services Research and Demonstration, this programming is to support a particular subpopulation, such as youth experiencing homelessness, to increase overall well-being. But importantly, there is also a poverty reduction component. So you want to show an increase in financial self-sufficiency and as well as kind of overall well-being. And this is a really popular account for nonprofits. So I would definitely flag the Social Services Research and Demonstration account. Then under the Department of Labor, we have Training and Employment Services. This one you might hear referred to as DOLETA. We love our acronyms in policy. This is another account where a lot of youth homelessness providers can be successful under. Requests are usually under $1 million for this and for the ACF accounts. And this one is to provide direct services that increase employment. So think, workforce training, career services, whatever. But importantly, the parameters of these projects have to align with the requirements of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. You may be familiar with WIOA programs. It's job training, apprenticeships, youth employment programs, things like that. So you don't have to be a WIOA grantee to be funded under this account, but your project has to, follow the requirements of a WIOA program. The other account is under the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Also typically for programming requests under $1 million. This is another great account for youth homelessness providers, nonprofits who want to provide programming to address mental health challenges, with outreach, supportive services, or prevent or address substance use. And then finally, under the Department of Education, we have two accounts. One is called Innovation and Improvement, and then the other is Higher Education. So innovation and improvement are open to those that are providing early childhood or K through 12 education services. And it can really be for a wide variety of projects: curriculum, teacher training, acquiring new technology, like a number of different things. And similarly, under the higher education account, but of course, that one is for colleges and universities. Although nonprofits could be eligible if they're supporting college students in some way. So again, these are focused on improving access or quality of post-secondary education, and it can be for same kind of things: curriculum, teacher training, it's kind of a wide variety of projects there. So these are kind of the primary accounts to be aware of that's relevant to your work. We have linked here our account cheat sheet, as well as some examples of different projects that have been funded under these accounts. But again, if you're unsure or you need more information, this is a great thing to talk to your lawmakers' staff about. Okay, so we talked about the different accounts for the federal earmarks. I'll throw just like a little caveat into all of that and the availability of funding within these accounts. I think I mentioned before, at the start of every appropriation cycle, Congress will release that year's guidance for earmarks, where they will say which accounts they plan on funding that year, and what entities are going to be eligible under each account, as well as the deadline for lawmakers to submit their requests. The guidance for fiscal year 2027 has not been released yet. Hopefully, it will be soon since they just finished FY26 appropriations. That's why you might not see some of your lawmakers' applications yet. They're still waiting for the guidance. But until Congress releases that guidance, we don't know for sure which accounts are going to be funded this year and what entities are going to be eligible. But this is, it's not anything new. This happens at the beginning of every earmark cycle. The guidance is often last minute. So we typically just look to last year's guidance and kind of, start from there. So last year, you can see the House was pretty restrictive in its earmark funding. It didn't fund a lot of accounts. And under HUD EDI, which is the construction account, nonprofits were not eligible. However, on the Senate side, they had, funded accounts and pretty regular eligibility, meaning, schools, nonprofits, state and local governments were eligible. So this is maybe what we're looking at next year. Again, we won't know for sure until that guidance comes out, but I would double check with your lawmakers and their staff. They might have some more insight. They might know when the guidance is coming out. So another good question to ask them when you email them soon. All right. My last bit for you before I turn it over to our providers to talk about their projects are some components that really make a strong application. And these are also detailed in the fact sheet that I have linked here. I've said it a million times now. I'll say it a million one times. Having relationships with your lawmaker staff is so important. You want them to know you, to know your program, understand your work and why it's important to the community. You also want them to be there to help you through the process or to vouch for you if need be. And again, if you don't know who your staff contact is, please feel free to email me and I can get you that information. And then I would encourage you to reach out to them as soon as possible, have a meeting, invite them to your program, all of that good stuff. It's really important that your application is also able to show that your project is fulfilling a demonstrated need in the community and it is supported by the community. So you can get really creative with this. Letters of support from community stakeholders are definitely essential. So you could do other nonprofits, state or local agencies, school, local businesses, whoever you can think of to vouch for you and your project. We've seen folks do press articles, maybe one that could show the need in your area, like if there's an article talking about youth homelessness in your area and highlights your program, or maybe someone can put in an op-ed for you talking about the importance of your work. We've also seen folks ask their local government to pass a citywide resolution in support of preventing and ending youth homelessness or kind of otherwise in support of your work. And then say if you have a HUD EDI request for construction, maybe you can get your project incorporated into the community plan. So these are just some ways that you can use to show that your project is supported and needed by the community. And that's really, really essential to your application. Next up, you want to show, sorry, my cat is joining us here today. You want to show that your project is feasible and sustainable. So this really goes back to the fact that earmarks are one-time funding. They're not meant to sustain a project long-term. So you want to be able to show that you have other funding planned to continue your program, continue the work that your earmark started, or, if it's construction, you have other funding to finish the project, maybe state or local money, donations, whatever it is. You really want to be able to show that your project is going to be successful beyond this kind of one-time sum of money. Another part that they want you to show is that you have the capacity to steward the funding should you receive it. They want to know that you have the staff capabilities to work with the federal agency after your earmark is awarded. Remember, that's the whole other component to this process, especially if you have a HUD EDI grant, that's the construction grant. There is a lot of work involved after that, like environmental reviews and things like that. So you want to show in your application that you have the capacity, with your staff to handle all of that. And of course, finally, you want to request an appropriate amount. You want to shoot high, of course, and get as much as you can, but they also want to see a realistic amount of funding. And this is something that you can really work with your lawmakers' staff on. And then finally, they actually say explicitly, avoid controversial issues. Remember that this is federal funding, and your application has to be approved by all of Congress, not just your lawmaker. So you really don't want anything that might kind of catch the eye of a lawmaker who maybe doesn't like earmarks and likes to cut earmarks. There are some lawmakers like that. So just be aware of that. And again, that's something that your lawmaker's staff would help you work through. So these are some top things to keep in mind to really submit a great application. Talk with your staff, to your lawmaker's staff, for their suggestions. Most lawmakers do want to secure these wins for their constituents, especially when it's an election year like it is this year. So all of our info about earmarks are linked here. We have general fact sheet, the accounts cheat sheet, examples of projects that have been funded, and our blog post and webpage all about earmarks. So please save these resources. I think there might be a link to the slides in the chat, but we'll also have this recording and the slides posted on our website. And please continue to put questions in the Q&A box, and we'll have time for discussion at the end. So with that, I'm very happy to turn it over to Josh Selo from the Bill Wilson Center.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Trinity. And good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending upon where you are right now. I am in slightly rainy Northern California. Bill Wilson Center is based in Santa Clara County, and we serve youth, young adults, and families in our region, largely Santa Clara and Santa Cruz counties, mostly with housing and behavioral health, probably similar to a lot of the work y'all do. It's a treat to be able to be on this webinar with so many colleagues doing amazing work across the country, and to share my own perspective about the wins and significant challenges of earmark funding. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Bill Wilson Center applied for fiscal 24. It was actually my first year as the CEO of Bill Wilson Center. I was super excited. As Trinity recommended, I knew our local congressperson, Ro Khanna, who served our 17th district here in California, and had a very close relationship with his staff. So was all excited that I could engage in a conversation with our lawmaker about some upgrades needed at our shelter and transitional housing programs. We asked for a fairly modest $92,000. It was the first time Bill Wilson Center and I had sought out earmark funding, and I was excited, but also circumspect. What do we actually need? How do we make ourselves competitive? We were one of 15 entities that applied in fiscal 24 for funding through earmarks. And we went through the House because our relationship was with the congressperson, and it seemed like the most reliable way to be seriously considered for funding. So 15 projects were advanced the year we were advanced. 80% received less funding than they asked for. So just be aware that that's a very real possibility. We received exactly what we asked for, but I think it's because our ask was modest. We were, warned is not the right word. We were recommended at the outset when we met with one of the congressman's staff that most asks were going to be for over $1 million. Many of those were cut significantly when they were appropriated much later, and one was not funded. So not everyone funded. The year that we received funding, the congressperson secured $14.7 million in projects in the 17th district, which was pretty amazing. But I want to show you the timeline for this, because you have to be really thoughtful about whether this works based upon the time horizon for the project that you're trying to get funded. So let's go to the next slide, and you'll see what it is. So we started the conversations in March 2023. I was in the job, I think, for a month when we started this. We submitted our preliminary proposal. We got support letters. Those were easy to secure. And we met with staffers. They actually did a pre-session. Then we did offline conversations. They were super helpful because they want to award this money in the community. And as Trinity said, it's a real win for them to be able to do press, because they will do press releases once this is done. They want to show off for what they've given back to the community that they serve. So we were identified by the congressman's office that we were selected to be one of the 15. Now, that just meant we were advancing in the process, not that it was final. There was a July 2023 draft allocations released. That's when we found out that many of the projects took a haircut. Now, we didn't get officially funded. And when I say officially funded, I'm saying officially funded on paper until March 2024. So that is not, it's a year from the first time we started the process, which is a long time. And then we actually didn't start the funding process until January 2025. We got a letter saying that we were going to be getting contacted with someone, and this went through HUD because it was a housing project, housing-related, shelter-related project, and then we were going to connect it with someone for technical assistance. We didn't really get connected until January of 2025. And then that person turned over 3 times. And we know the impacts of COVID were sort of in there, and shutdowns impacted it. And this is all before the shenanigans happening in DC now. So I don't even know what's going to happen in the future with a much smaller federal workforce. Only this month are we making the final touches on our application. And going on almost 3 years since we started, there is 0 cash in the bank, and none of these projects have been started. So cautionary tale, maybe. And yes, that little face that came by the screen, that is exactly how I feel. Now, this is when I think about what the lessons learned were. What I really want to share is what I have on the next slide. So, and some of these we've heard already, but it's worth reviewing. The first is you need to align with what's available and the funding priorities. Our year nonprofits could be funded for these kind of projects, but it all depends upon who has majority in the House. And right now it's not looking that great. So be thoughtful about that, and that will determine what you decide to apply for and if there's alignment. And as you've seen from our timeline, the process is incredibly slow. And if you are on the fast track to finish something and you need money immediately, find another funder, because this is not for you. I think that even if you were to fill out the application very slowly, the wheels of government, even if you fill out the paperwork really fast, the wheels of government are very slow, and maybe even slower now, I don't know. But it takes a long time. I'm interested to see what Josh number 2 has to say about how long it took them for their projects. But I'm cautious about doing this again for Bill Wilson Center, because I feel like there's unless we were doing a capital campaign on a very large amount with a larger time horizon to finish a project than what we needed, I don't think that I would do it for repairs that have a shorter term time horizon. So what do they say? Hindsight is 2020. Size of ask, we referenced that already. Be thoughtful. So I'm looking at the list right now of people who were funded. One organization asked for 4 million and received 500,000. So that's a pretty significant haircut. I don't even know if they're able even to do the project, having received such a small amount of the money they asked for. And as I said, 80% received less funding than they asked for. And then the determination is like, well, can I even do it? How am I going to supplement what I asked for? We did not pad our ask, which sort of gets to the last bit of advice, which I have for you, is you need to, and I don't know how this works, and maybe Trinity or Josh can refer to this, but you need to think about the future cost of the project, not the today cost of the project. So any economists in the room, I know there aren't often a lot of us, and I'm not one, in the nonprofit space, but we need some economists to think about what is the future cost of this, whatever it's 10% a year, compounding over the course of 2 or 3 years of what the future, and then ask for that amount of money. Because what we're experiencing right now is we asked for $92,000 in 2023 dollars. That is not the same as $92,000 in 2026 dollars. And our capacity to complete all these projects is going to be significantly impaired as a result. And for us, these were the only funders because these were rehab projects. This was not a capital campaign. So the calculus might be different on a capital campaign where you're casting a wide net to get a broad number of funders to support your projects anyway. But I do think you need to think about what is it going to cost 2 or 3 years down the road, or you might find yourself unable to complete a project after two things. One, they cut what they offered you, and two, that isn't even enough based upon what the current cost of your project has become. We have not applied organizationally, as far as I know, Bill Wilson Center in the past for any program related earmark funding. So I'm eager to hear how that's worked for other folks. But as I said, I'm very hesitant about using this as an option in the future, only because I feel like it's so much easier to raise money from individuals and you get the money much more quickly. I think that's all I have. Looking forward to your questions, and I'm looking forward to learning from Josh.
Thank you so much, Josh. Now it is my pleasure, next up, to introduce Josh Louwerse from Covenant House, Alaska. Thanks.
Josh number 2 in action. So work at Covenant House, Alaska. We're based in Anchorage. We're part of the larger Covenant House Federation. I saw a couple other Covenant House folks from around the country that are participating. We have a housing continuum that starts with outreach and runs through rapid rehousing with all this sort of tiers in the middle. So we serve young people 13 to 25 with wraparound services and an array of different types of housing. So we can go to the next slide. So federal earmarks were gone for about 10 years. In 2021, they came back. And so right away, we decided we were going to start to go after some of these. I do want to have a little caveat that Alaska is a unique place in that we have a huge geographic area, but we only have 750,000 people. So that gives us a lot of access. Our state leaders, our federal leaders, our local leaders, because there's just less people here to engage them, which has allowed us over years and decades, in some cases, to be able to build really strong relationships with, like, Senator Murkowski, who has been a huge champion for us. We know her very well. She comes to our events. She's seen what we do. Her staff have joined us to learn about what we do and how we offer, and so that relationship is really, really important. But so we started off with the programmatic dollar, and we went for the 500,000, and that's something that we worked with our legislative folks on, kind of gauging what they thought would be something that we could start with. We also wanted to, in a way, sort of practice this. I think, in listening to Josh number 1, I think what we've been able to do is sort of arc over time. And obviously our 25 request wasn't funded. But we've been thinking about this as a long-term funding source for multiple different types of projects that build on each other. And so it is a one-time funding, but if you're able to sort of wrap that into a plan where you're headed, you can be getting these different types of projects. So the first project that we went after it gave us an opportunity to go statewide. So we have all these communities, all of our state hub communities that don't have road systems, and we're very close to colonization here. So our Alaska Native folks have experienced a lot of trauma, and there's still a lot of hardship that has come from that. And so there's a lot of young people that end up coming from rural areas into urban ones. And so as an organization, we set out to say, is there ways that we can help lift resources in rural areas to be able to help ensure that young people can get the resources they need in their hometown, and not have to come to a bigger one. And so we started out with this training, and we were able to bring across the state, data collection training, human trafficking training, training on how to serve young people, sharing our learnings and helping to craft that to fit into these rural communities or these hubs. And then our second year, we opened up some micro unit housing, and we had used some COVID dollars to be able to add what we call our Covey Academy, which is a job training center with housing above it, and then these micro units. And we were still looking for programmatic dollars though, because how it came in, how the money came in, we were able to purchase a building, we were able to build onto a building, but we were looking for programmatic dollars. So this gave us a year, worth of buffer to be able to then figure out how are we going to continue to put these programs funded going forward. So that program stuff, and for us, the timeline has been pretty steady. I think we're now doing the EDI request, and so that might be a little longer, but it's really been about a year, in line with about a year after we have put in the request. That next year or that next federal fiscal year, we're entering into, or we're receiving the dollars. In 24, we wanted to further lift our partners around the state. And so we've been able to go to different communities and help them bring on some housing projects and some additional case management and some education opportunities to really just help strengthen the ecosystem out there. As I said, so many young people that we serve come from those places, and being able to keep them in those spaces is better. Last year, we were working on a project that we're running through our Covey Academy. We were not funded. And, I do think that some of that, as you talked about, the sort of change in the amount of staff people there are and the sort of environment around the federal government right now. I think that played a factor into not being funded, although previously we had been. And then this year we run a program. Covenant houses all over the country run a rites of passage program, and we've been running that out of a building that is a partner building, or one of our partners. And this we had hoped to be able to purchase it and remodel, but we got the money at least to be able to purchase it. So that's good. And so that we'll be learning about this EDI process as we go through that. You want to jump to the next one? Just some pictures of us being able to go statewide training. This rural capacity building. Two of the people at that, this is out in Bethel, Alaska. It's about an hour-and-a-half flight. There's no roads that go there. They're a hub for 100 or more villages. But we have two of our staffers, Mary Peltola, when she was our representative, and Senator Sullivan at staffers there. And we've been able to take our, Senator Murkowski's staff as well have come out and seen these projects. So I think as we think about, I know relationship has been emphasized, and I'm emphasizing more. But getting to know your folks, helping them to understand what you do, sort of catch the vision. And like I said, we are a smaller population state, so I know that we have more access potentially than others. But finding ways to do that is a big deal. And there are other two projects with our affordable housing and Christian success. We'll go to the next one. So our learnings, relationships. I think one of the things that we have been able to do here is we know our federal legislators, they know us. We have spent the last couple of years really trying to engage our state legislators. And so there is a large contingent of state legislators that now understand who we are and what we do. And they are great references. There are those letters of support can come from those folks. Also with our municipality, with our mayor, with our assembly. Those are folks that we go to that we have helped them understand what we do. So the broader that net, the better. And the way that I sort of think about it is that we're a bridge for the voice of young people, right? Like we all know the young people we serve, we know what their needs are. And the more that we can help our community leaders catch the vision of what it means for them to not experience homelessness, or to have it be, a rare and brief, and the impacts that has, and for them to hear, a young person's story, or to understand the dynamics of what's happening, that brings action. And so the more that we're connected to young people and empower young people. One of the things that we've started to do is we have youth action boards across the state that are meeting with our legislators, and we've taken young people to DC to advocate, and so that can be all part of the relationship building. Multiple funding strategies. As we said, this is not it's a one-time, but it can be a one-time and a one-time for different things. But so when we approach our requests, we're thinking about multiple different opportunities that are ahead of us for how we're going to make this sustainable. And so that if one of those or two of those falls through, we still have options. And that's part of being able to say that we have a plan for sustainability. And maybe we don't know the exact funder or exactly how it's going to play out, but we have a plan, we have ideas, and we're headed forward. I think one of the things that you can see through our sort of progression here is that you can build momentum. And I think it would be smart to start with a smaller type of request to sort of get some practice at managing this and building those relationships. And I think that's what we started with a 500,000, and then we had 2 million, and we were able to build on the practicing how to do this with them and strengthen those relationships. And then they more fully understood, and we were able to show that we could accomplish what we said we would. We have the data to back it up, we have the outcomes to back it up, and folks want to fund things that work. And then I do, and Josh referenced this too, I think the program funding is less challenging. Like we reported through ACF, we have multiple other ACF grants. We're very used to reporting that way, and the money came fairly easily in the timeline. And so there's less hurdles, there's less challenges with those types of dollars. And yeah, the reporting is something that is fairly easy. So that's what I got.
Thank you so much to the both of you. So now we will move on to some time for Q&A. I think we'll have about maybe 8 minutes or so for Q&A, 7 to 8 minutes. So please feel free to use the Q&A box to put some questions in there. And there's some that I answered already as you guys were talking, but I just want to highlight. A lot of them kind of revolved around like, well, I don't know, if my lawmaker really likes earmarks, or, maybe we had someone who has a special election. Are they going to be here in time? I'm in a blue city. Like, are they going to award earmarks? All that kind of stuff. So a little behind the scenes, each lawmaker is allowed, and this comes out in the guidance, they'll say, each senator can request 15 projects under this account. So each one has a certain amount that they can request. And typically, they fill up those requests, and those requests are, typically awarded. Even if it's like now, we have a Republican trifecta, but you're a blue city, they'll still typically award them. You just want to make sure that you're avoiding the controversial topics. And that's something that your lawmakers staff would help you with, like even before they submit your request to the Appropriations Committee. Like they're not going to submit anything to the Appropriations Committee that they feel is going to get struck down right away. So I think, even if we're blue holdouts in the Republican trifecta, you're still you probably have a pretty good shot of being awarded as long as you've passed your particular lawmaker's parameters. The other is if you have a lawmaker who we have somebody say they're outspoken against earmarks, should we try to apply? I would just first double, some lawmakers I mentioned, they speak out against earmarks. They don't think it's an appropriate use of federal funding, it's pork barrel funding, all of that. But they might still request them. So that could just be their public rhetoric, and then they request. So I would just first check the full lists on the House website and the Senate website of earmarks that have been requested. Sometimes lawmakers post it on their website as well. That would be a first step because, maybe they kind of say that, but they still make those requests. I would reach out to staff just in case, and just to, talk about the importance of your program and just to ask them. And then finally, say if you have senators who don't do it, well, you can try your House or vice versa. If your House member doesn't do it, or if you're in a special election right now, then, look to your senator. So that's the kind of nice thing about having those sort of two separate processes on the House and the Senate side. And let me take a look here through the Q&A. And let me put here in the chat the links to all of the requests from this past cycle. Sometimes your lawmakers will post on their website like a big celebration, I was able to secure these earmarks this year. So I would check if you want to see what's been awarded in your area, but you can see the full list from the House and then the full list from the Senate. And when your request actually makes it through the whole appropriations process, you're actually listed in the bill. They have a big table in the appropriations bill of all of the projects and for how much they were funded. So you can also see it in the appropriations bills that just came out. Let's see. Maybe, Josh, if you know the answer to this question or insight, in the Q&A, it says, what happens if you go for earmark funding under HUD EDI, but during the lengthy process, you get an additional resource to fund the project? Would you lose the earmark, or could you layer the funding or repurpose it more towards programming? You wouldn't be able to repurpose it towards programming, but maybe layer it still with the construction. Did that come up for you at all, Josh?
With Josh.
HUD EDI, Josh, or either Josh with experience with HUD EDI.
Yeah, I mean, so we're in our first one. I would say that, like Trinity said, is as long as you keep it in the same bucket, there's opportunity to have conversation with your legislator as that goes on. Like we had some changes to some of the programmatic things that we did years. And we just communicate that, and let them know that we thought this was going to happen, and then this happened, and so now we're going to move that over. And but yeah, I think any opportunity to layer is beneficial. So I think the more that you just be upfront about what you're experiencing, and they recognize too that this is a long process. So and it's dynamic, things change and keep going. So yeah, I think if that happens, I would just let them know. And if you have another idea that fits within the parameters, that they would continue to fund it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So you would be able to change and kind of update, but as long as it's staying within the parameters of, the account that you were funded under. So if you got money from HUD EDI, which is just construction, acquisition, that you wouldn't be able to then use it for programming, like how you can under, the ACF accounts. But construction projects are expensive. So hopefully you would be able to find another good use of that funding. Especially since the HUD EDI tends to be a big chunk of money in comparison to the others. Okay, question in the chat regarding the one-time funding restriction, is that per account, per lawmaker, per project? If you receive funding from your senator, can you ask for that project another year from another representative? Can you make the request again to the same senator? So the one-time funding restriction refers to the project itself. As you saw, like from Josh, you can have like one organization can have, different get different projects funded in different years and from the same senator and all of that. It's really just they want to prevent this earmark funding from being used in the way like a grant is it's not meant to sustain a program or sustain a project. It's really supposed to kind of bolster it sort of one time. But I don't know if either of you who've had multiple earmarks have anything to add, like, as you're getting an additional one, you've had one previously, were there any talks about, how to avoid that?
I mean, for us, because we have this really good relationship with Senator Murkowski and her staff, we've been able to talk through, like as we're looking at, and we're in an organization that's sort of poised to be able to be growing. And so for us, this is an opportunity to take some of the ideas that we have and, sort of demonstrate it as like almost creating like a demonstration project. Like if we get this out there, obviously we're not going to get that additional funding, but it helps us to grow. And even thinking about the layering piece, like as these dollars come in, you can go to other funders and talk about this project and potentially leverage those dollars to bring it on additional dollars. But so yeah, I think the projects do need to be somewhat different year over year. And it depends, like we have also asked for dollars from our house. We only have one house rep in Alaska, but and have not gotten funded by them. Multiple different people actually. But so there's no limit to how many times you can apply or who you can apply through. But it does need to be sort of that new project.
Thank you for that. Another question was about the funding ranges. Of course, this really depends on what your project is. Some folks have, I've seen funding for like a one-day event to gather stakeholders to talk about youth homelessness. That's something really small, all the way to millions for construction. So it really just depends on the project, but typically, HUD EDI is 1.5 to 4 million. The kind of program accounts, so like the employment or the ACF accounts, are typically under $1 million. And then the Department of Education accounts can be a little higher, maybe 1 million or a little more. It really, again, just kind of depends on what project you're doing. But that one has sort of a wider range of uses. It can be for training, it can be to bolster a program, or it can be to purchase, equipment, purchase technology, computers, like things like that. So it can really just depend. All right.
So in fiscal 24, I'm looking at the projects, the 14 projects that Congressman Khanna submitted all to HUD. The asks range from ours, we were the low end at 92,000. The highest was 5 million. But when you look at what was awarded, again, we were the lowest awarded at 92,000. The most that was awarded was 3.5 million. And most of the awards were in the 1 million range, although quite a few were in the 500 to 850,000 range. So there really is a broad sort of spectrum as it relates to what you ask for and what you get, assuming you get funded.
Thank you. Okay, another one in the Q&A for both of you, whoever would like to take it, or both. Are the earmarks typically reimbursement based or wired up front? So do you typically get like the whole sum of money once you finish with the agency, or is it kind of payments over time?
Bingo. It's payments over time. So yeah, it's not necessarily reimbursement based, but it just comes in chunks.
We haven't gotten any money, so I have no idea. But it's not a lot, so I hope it's not payments. If they start sending us $5,000 checks,
yeah,
I will be
I think for the
disappointed.
EDI, I guess maybe I would rephrase and say the program dollars come in chunks. I would guess that the construction dollars come on.
And I'll say I remember at our last Earmarks webinar, we had another provider who had a HUD EDI, who was in the federal agency process, and they had received like a partial payment. And then there was like another part of their payment that was being held up by an environmental review and, kind of stuff you have to do. So I think it can kind of depend. But as I think both Joshes have mentioned, the HUD EDI, it's great. It's a great account. It's a unique account, but there's a lot that goes into it. So you definitely want to be prepared for that. Okay, last one. Just reiterating that I've been awarded earmarks before. Am I understanding correctly that you don't need to follow the agency grant guidelines? Yes, these are not grants. So you're not, your earmark award isn't attached to like the parameters of a specific grant. The guidance will come out from Congress hopefully soon as to what the parameters are for each account. There's some like the Department of Labor workforce training one where you sort of have to align with the priorities of an existing federal program. So in that case, WIOA, but you're not kind of following a particular grant guideline. Okay, so thank you all so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you soon, March 12 and 13 here in Washington, D.C. for the National Summit on Youth Homelessness and Hill Day. We're really excited to see you all, meet with your lawmakers on Hill Day, and then hang out and do some breakout groups on the second day. We also have another upcoming webinar Thursday, February 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern. This is going to be all about our consulting and training services, something that the National Network for Youth offers, but we've really kind of kickstarted and improved our catalog of training services that we offer, ranging from policy advocacy to partnering with young people and our Youth Action Leadership Certificate. So we'll have this webinar. Please feel free to register to learn all about those offerings. Hope that you all know about our vital document legal hotline for young people or providers, liaisons who are helping young people can call or text this hotline. Speak with a lawyer if that young person needs some assistance in obtaining their IDs, birth certificate, social security card, whatever it might be. So please share information about this hotline. And with that, we're over. So I'd like to thank you all again for joining us here today. The recording and slides will be posted on our website, but please feel free to reach out with any questions. Thank you.